saving grace.
The Brock Lawley Show.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Brock Lawley program. My name is Brock Lawley, and this is the segment where we're going to do a little Brock Lawley monologue today, 2014. How would we treat the person of Jesus Christ? I was reading the Gospels recently with that in mind, and it was a very fascinating mental exercise, and that is, what would my modern-day landscape do to the person of Jesus Christ? If you Googled him and he was alive right now, what kind of impression would you walk away with? I started thinking about this. He's hanging out with prostitutes. You know that the straight and narrow aren't going to like that one, right? He's calling out powerful people. He's hanging out with tax collectors. He's hanging out with very unsavory characters. What is that going to look like in a Google search? My suspicion is that he would meet a very, very similar fate today. The person of Jesus Christ pretty much came to earth and conducted a two-fronted revolution. Pretty much called out everybody, right? That's not going to win you favor. I wonder what media matters, or the ACLU, New York Times for that matter. What kind of ink they would give the person of Jesus Christ walking around now. Christ was in the trenches, ladies and gentlemen. I've studied his ministry intently as a believer, and what I think is amazing about him is he has a micro and a macro ministry. On the macro, he is calling out evil. He's calling out people who are not pursuing righteousness. He is calling out the greatest of profanity today, sin. He is saying, do not sin. He is saying, this is right and that is wrong. He has a very clear black and white contrast in that respect. And yet he kneels down, he calls off the dog, says, who is to throw the first stone? You without sin throw it. He's around the unclean. He's around the lowly. He's around the people that will definitely get the TMZ writers of our time to be writing a lot of slander in those magazines that you see when you're checking out at the grocery line. On the macro level, he was calling out Pharisees. He was calling out the power structure. He was really ruffling some feathers. And yet, on the micro, he was dining with tax collectors. He was making everybody angry. He seemed to have this bravery, this spit in vinegar, this ferocious roar on the macro. And on the micro, he had this lamb-like love. It is a fascinating model for the way I think we should live our lives. And I think that we reversed the whole thing. When I look at the world at large, and especially when I look at my fellow Christians, what I see is capitulators on the macro, cowards on the macro, chasing a carrot on a stick of this world's affirmation and love that you will never get. I assure you, Christ never got it. And on the micro, we're full of hypocrisy. We don't care. We don't roll up our sleeves and get into the dirt of people's lives where they need us. The hurting, the sick, the invalid, the old, all pushed away into segments of society so we don't have to see them. It's exactly the opposite of Christ's model. We've become cowards on the macro, where we should be courageous, and we've become coarse and callous on the micro, when we should be caring. This is the confusion that I run into a lot. I'm obviously involved in politics. I talk about politics on the radio. I have a big internet footprint where I deal with apologetics and theological arguments. And I'm looking into a camera, I'm talking into a microphone, and I'm trying the best I can to speak salty truth to a world that pretty much gets the poison of lies 24/7. And a lot of Christians are very, very uncomfortable with this. I don't like the optics. I don't like how this looks. I don't want to be associated with that kind of fire-breathing truth-telling. Makes people uncomfortable. I don't like it. Now, to be fair to these people, what I think they're worried about is I think they're worried about the trappings of today's polarizing politics getting in the way of the message of the gospel of grace. And I think that's giving them the benefit of the doubt. But the truth be told, I think a lot of people just don't like the fact that the reputation of somebody who stands on common sense, stands on constitutional adherence, let's just be honest with ourselves. This is a political climate that does not look on that with bells and whistles, celebration, ticker tape parade, so on and so forth. No, you get scolding. You get slandered. You get lied about. I've experienced the entire gauntlet. But I don't make any attempt to apologize for or hide my footprint in this ideological fight. A fight for the very heartbeat of this nation. And make no mistake, that's what you're involved in. And I'll admit that Christianity and conservative politics is a messy marriage. It's not a hand to glove. It isn't. Jesus was in the trenches, but he didn't wear a uniform. I believe that to be true. But I've searched God's word. I've searched church history for a blueprint of wisdom on the matter. How do you walk through this minefield? And what I've found is that every generation is forced to wrestle with the great questions of their time, the great matters that face them. What is the role of the Christian in this repeated call for good men to fight evil, to defend innocence? One of my Christian heroes, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was undoubtedly a man that did not agree with me politically. He was a bit of a pacifist. And yet here I see a man who was thrown into life-altering circumstance. Bonhoeffer, at the beginning of his ministry, believed that under no circumstances at all should you inflict violence whatsoever. And ultimately, he concluded that he needed to act. He needed to be a man of action in the face of Hitlerian evil. He tried to take the man's life. That's how much of an about-face he did on the matter. I think of the founding fathers. You can't argue that these men didn't have their nose in the Word of God. Constructed a system that without a doubt was meant to have God in the center to govern lives, and the proof is in the pudding, 200 and some change of prosperity. And yet these men, who were clearly God-fearing men, decided that they needed to shake off the chains of tyranny via war. And then jump ahead, you got guys like Stonewall Jackson. Have you ever read that guy? Or every other word off of his lips was God this, God that. He was one of the most righteous men to ever live. And yet this man picked up his sword and his musket and fought. I see this pattern over and over and over and over again. Where's the wisdom in so many of the cultural struggles that we face today? What hills should Christians die on? That's essentially the wrestling that I do. Where do you find Christ's footprints on this beach filled with carnage and sin and confusion? I think these questions are purposefully there so that we are forced to return to his lighthouse of wisdom, forced to return to his word for guidance, understanding, and a case-by-case situation, always seeking courageous behavior on the macro, always seeking grace and love on the micro. When I think of it more specifically, I think our disposition pilots a lot of this. I think God created us as different as can be. Some of us are real boisterous. Some of us are shy. Some of us are real talkative. Some of us are all but mute, but I don't think there's any situations in which we're not to be salty. We're not to be involved in everything. We're not supposed to just build beautiful buildings and hide out in them. We're supposed to be in the thick of it, in the fray. What we have to be aware of, I think, today, what the temptations are today, is to call everything some shade of gray, to act as though both sides are on equal moral footing in this sewage pipe that we live in. That's not true. There are sides that are clearly warring against what God's word teaches, and there are sides that are not. That is just the truth. There's no such thing as just a blank canvas in our culture. Some ideological brush is going to paint on that canvas. Ideas of a very specific sort will fill your children's mind in the media, in pop culture. Bad ideas have horrendous consequences, and I would just urge you to look around you right now and ask yourself, what ideas are piloting the ship right now? What is the motivation for Christians to run and hide? What's the reason? Could it be that we want the respect of the world? Could that be what motivates us? Is that the wind in our sails? Could it be the pain of seeming backward for standing on some archaic truth? Some old scriptural writings, dusty, irrelevant writings that we've so clearly moved beyond, as evidenced by this paradise we've created. I would say to you that's nonsense. The political battles of our time are grafted in to the moral battles of our time. I'm not one of these conservatives that think fiscal politics and social politics can somehow be surgically removed. They can't be. You're not going to get fiscal responsibility without moral responsibility, because what's the motivation for it? Well, no, you need a moral culture. Alex de Tocqueville, a wonderful writer that you should read, said this brilliantly. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the greatness and the genius of America. America is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. I ask you, do you think America is ceasing to be great? It is It has never been easy to go countercultural, but right now, the culture's wrong. Right now, the politics are wrong. Right now, the temperature of this nation is absolutely at a fever. And there's going to be a modern day cost to standing up for what you truly believe, for letting your yes be yeses, your no be no. The contemporary appetite that prefers sanitized, cellophane-wrapped, safe people that walk around like they're in bumper wrap and don't involve themselves in each other's lives, this has got to go. I'm going to ask you again the question I opened this segment with. What kind of category would Christ fit into if you saw him walking around right now, turning over tables? What do you think the people that avoid conflict at all cost would think of that? Clearly, Christ thought there was a time to make a little bit of a fuss. The purpose of our life is not to be completely comfortable. The purpose of our life is not to never, ever say anything that happens to rub somebody the wrong way. This is the model I truly believe in. I think this was the model that Jesus Christ evidenced for us. Fight evil in the macro, but love people in the micro. All right, we're going to take a break. BrockLawleyMusic.com. I have a worship record right now you might be interested in. Check it out, BrockLawleyMusic.com. Also, I have a iHeartRadio show with this kind of commentary. Every single day I put content up there. The Brock Lawley Show, iHeartRadio, and check out WMANFM.com. We'll be right back.